and welcome to this fireside chat. We're not quite on schedule, a little bit of technical glitches, but we're getting through those, and it's given me some time to get to know our wonderful guest, Carl Reeder. Now, Carl is the author of 3 books, including his most recently launched book, which has literally just been in the last couple of weeks, Boss It. Carl is a journalist, speaker, and a podcast host, but he's most known for helping people understand business in layman's terms. Carl, it's great to have you here at this fireside chat. How are you doing?
Hey, Sonia, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's my absolute pleasure to be here, and it's my mission to help everyone who's tuning in.
Carl, tell me about your journey and where you got this passion to help people understand business in the layman's terms, sort of demystifying business.
Sure. So I'm actually going to rewind and start the journey very early on. And I do assure everybody that this isn't going to take up a whole half an hour, even though I'm talking about my own favourite subject. So unfortunately, I wasn't really cut out for the academic system. And I'm sure that that would resonate with so many of the people tuning into this. And actually, I left school the moment I got my national insurance card at 15 3/4. So that ages me horrifically that it was still a paper card that I'd received. But I'd left school before my GCSEs and decided to do a YTS in hairdressing. Really didn't work out.
I remember YTSs. Now you're showing your age, Carl.
Exactly right. So I think they might have been rebranded to modern apprenticeships by that point. But anyway, it was slave labour. It was, it was 30 quid a week for sweeping up hair, washing people's hair, mixing up dyes, but I wasn't allowed to put them in the hair. It was a horrific job. But I was in a position where I really wanted to do something to, quite frankly, earn a bit of money. And I was getting bored at school. Anyway, went back, did my GCSEs and fell by accident into accountancy, having along the way, worked in a supermarket and robbed Peter to pay Paul, basically. It was... It got to the point by that stage I'd moved out with my then girlfriend and she was pregnant. We had a bed sit together, which I had bills that needed to be paid. So all of my worldly goods that I'd accumulated during my life had to be sold to pay the bills and all of this stuff. Anyway, I fell into accountancy with no idea of what an accountant did or in fact what a business did. And that's really strange because I did business studies at GCSE for about 1 3/4 years. So I should have known about business, but the stuff that I was taught about in school was actually about share price valuations and the FTSE 100 and big shiny glass buildings. There was no relatability to that, even though my dad was actually self-employed and run his own business. To me, there was no connection between the stuff that was taught at school and the stuff that would actually excite me in the real world, which is the really simple thing of business, that it's all about buying something for a fiver, selling it for a tenner. It was just overcomplicated and felt so unattainable. Anyway, going back to, I guess, the journey. So I fell into accountancy, no idea what an accountant was. In fact, I had to go to the library, which again shows my age, to look in a careers book and find out what an accountant does. Regurgitated all of that during the interview and was fortunate enough to be offered the job and realised about 1.5 years into it that it just wasn't for me. But what I really did enjoy was the limited, at that point, contact that I had with clients. So I started to go out and meet clients, first of all, to train them on computer applications. So looking at just computerising their records from a manual cash book onto a spreadsheet or onto Sage. I then started winning work. I then started promoting the business to help me win more work. I then took on a sales team. I then took on a marketing team. And I ended up buying out the practice back in about 2007, the deal was agreed. So 2007, agreed the deal. That was at the age of 26. And then scaled the business from a team of 8 through to a team of 60. So we built it to multi-mil turnover. Dominated our sector that we're in, which is franchising. And yeah, we've done some amazing things. We've got about 3,000 clients now in that business. And I retired from that business in February 2019. Running alongside that, I'd actively started to move myself away from the business from about 2013. So I wrote my first book in 2015, The Startup Coach, and followed that up with the Franchising Handbook 2016. And then my newest book, Boss It, which, as you said, has come out in the last few weeks. What I'd learned along the way, and from speaking to thousands and thousands of business owners, I've helped everybody from the man in a van or the independent business right the way through to businesses like Oak Furniture Land, Centrica, Arsenal Football Club, some multinational businesses, as well as the on the ground businesses. What I'd found was that there's a common misconception across all businesses, large and small, that business needs to be complicated. And the reality is that business isn't complicated. It's hard work. I'm not going to say it's easy, because often we think of easy versus complicated. It's hard work and it takes consistency, but it certainly isn't complicated. So that's what's given me my passion to share what I do and to try and help people in business, is the fact that I want to demystify business and get rid of these magic pills that everyone wants to spend $97 or $997 for, because they're a nonsense, quite frankly, and instead focus on the fact that business, whilst it's hard work, it's not complicated.
So right now, Carl, would you say we can't have this session without talking about COVID and how that has affected business? Would you say that has complicated things? How do you see the pandemic and what it's done to the business landscape?
Sure. So I think we first of all need to acknowledge that COVID has been the most game-changing event in all of our lives. Unless we've lived through World War II, I think that this has been the most game-changing event in our lives. And even for those who've lived through the war, my better half's granddad is actually, he lived through the war, and he's saying that COVID is far worse. And I don't know if that's his memory playing tricks on him, but he's saying that the experience of being locked down is something that he never had during the war to that extent. So we've gone through a real societal shift, and we've gone through a real public health crisis as well. Everybody knows somebody in some way that's been affected by COVID. We've all been affected in our pocket in some way. So I don't want to be too dismissive of the very real impacts of COVID, but from a business perspective, I wouldn't say that it's actually made business more complicated in any way, because there are always curveballs that are outside of our control in business, regardless of what business we're in, regardless of the size of our business and so on. And in fact, I would actually contend that the more complicated that a business owner has tried to make their business, the more difficult it's been for them to adapt and pivot. Because these changes that have taken place are changes that would have happened anyway. I think COVID has accelerated a lot of changes in a lot of businesses, and we've just had to think on our feet on how we can adapt and how we can serve our customers.
And what would you say to anyone that's actually in the audience now and maybe thinking about launching a business, and maybe they're a bit nervous because of what's going on? Would you sort of give them the yes, go ahead and launch it? Is there a piece of advice you could give them?
Hey, do you know what? You've taken the words out of my mouth, and I think you could probably guess that was going to be my view on this. It's really strange, because there was a survey by a company called World Options, and 68% of the public between 18 and 55, I believe it was, 68% either want to start a business or were in the process of planning to start a business. Now, that's a phenomenal number. And the problem that we have is that there's a reluctance to start. And the reason why there's a reluctance to start is a fear of either time or money. But it ultimately comes down to a lack of confidence. And I believe that in a lot of people with that lack of confidence, it comes down to a deep-rooted concern of what will my friends and family think if this goes wrong? Because as a nation in the UK, we don't necessarily embrace failure in the way that they do in the US. We see failure as real failure rather than as a learning exercise. Now, the shift that's happened over COVID is that, were we to rewind 5 years ago and ask somebody who's about to start their business, what's the worst that can happen? They would say, well, do you know what? The business might go wrong and I might end up bankrupt and I might not be able to pay the bills and this, that, and the other. And there'll be all of these very valid concerns. But now, if you say to somebody, what's the worst that can happen? Yeah, you'd get a bit of a laugh, because we've gone through such a seismic shift and such a catastrophic event outside of our control, that within us, we've realized that we've only got one life and that there's never a right time to do anything. So I think much like having a baby, I certainly remember.
I was going to say that's an unusual example, Carl.
No, but like having a baby, there's no one right time to have a baby, is there? And I'm sure that parents on this webinar will empathise with. There's always a reason why you can't, but then in 10, 15 years' time, you will always look back and say, why didn't I? So there's always objections that you can bring up. But during this COVID period, and this sounds really flippant, any new business owner has got the perfect get out of jail free card. Because if they're worried about their friends or family saying, your business was a failure, then do you know what? There was hundreds of other failures. It really is the opportunity where you can try and change, and there will naturally be some winners and losers. But I believe that now there's more of an acceptance around the failure through COVID, and that can only be a good thing.
Why is it? I just want to pick you up on something that you said earlier. There's such a large percent of the population that is sitting there saying, I wish I ran my own business. Now, I gave up my corporate life a few years ago, and I've been in corporate life 15 years. And there was a turning point, and I think a lot of people reach that turning point. But what traits do you think there are in people that actually makes them actually go ahead and make that leap, take that jump?
Naivety. No, look, I don't know. So there was a study by King's College London over the last year or so about whether entrepreneurship is through nature or nurture. Is there a particular gene that, or is there a particular thing that's within you as a youngster that makes you more inclined to be entrepreneurial, or is it something that you can learn and adapt along the way? Now, the business owners that I've seen, I've seen some tremendously successful business owners who, I'm not talking internet gurus here. Let's put that nonsense to one side. I'm talking proper business owners who've made themselves hundreds of millions. And you wouldn't necessarily identify them in a row of people as being entrepreneurial. You certainly wouldn't see them, posing for pictures on Instagram next to a private jet or a Lamborghini, or selling courses on how others can do it. That's just not what it's all about. And from that perspective, there's no one avatar that fits an entrepreneur. And I can absolutely assure you of that based on people I've seen be there, they've seen it, they've done it, and I've helped them along the way. What I would say, though, is that there are some characteristics of the way that they do stuff. So I think that persistence and sheer bloody mindedness is one of them. I think that it's certainly if you're going to try something and then dabble around with something else, which a lot of people think is entrepreneurial. A lot of people think that they need to search for the next shiny object, but that doesn't make a successful business. That makes you a sucker for every possible get rich quick scheme, but it doesn't make you an entrepreneur. So persistence, bloody mindedness, I think clarity on vision, and I think a willingness to acknowledge where your own weaknesses are as well, because we all have certain strengths that we bring to the table. Some of us are big picture thinkers, some of us are detail thinkers, some of us are great at man management, some of us aren't, some of us are great at process management, some of us aren't. And understanding and appreciating that every single attribute you've got in yourself, there's somebody better, and you need to go and find that person who's better than you, recruit them as part of your team. Again, I think that's something. But ultimately, I think if we were to cut away all of that, it's what makes a successful entrepreneur. It's somebody who can sleep at night comfortable with making big decisions, and the mindset that, whether it's right or wrong, they've made a considered decision and that they can pull through it.
I love that. You mentioned mindset, because I think that is really key to be a successful entrepreneur. But just going back again as well to what you said, you mentioned You mentioned if you don't have recognizing your own strengths and your own weaknesses is just as powerful, and getting people in that are better than you. What would you say to people that are out there listening to that and saying, well, that's all very, very well for you to say, Carl, but I don't have the money to hire staff. So what do I do? What should entrepreneurs do at the beginning before they get to that stage?
Build a proper business. Again, in the nicest possible way. A business isn't a business. And I'm going to make a distinction here between a self-employed job and a business. A business is something that can work without the entrepreneur. So it's whether it's a turnkey system or not. If you use the E-Myth definition, you could use Robert Kiyosaki's examples and so on. But we need to differentiate a role that you do independently of an employer, but it is still dependent on you bringing in the income, and a business that operates as an independent entity of the entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur can come and go. They might fulfill a role within the business, but it's bigger than just the individual. Now, I completely get that a self-employed person will probably be thinking, who's this bald git going on about, employing people and so on? I'm not in that place. So what you need to do, if you're in that place, you need to think about, do you want to be in that place? Because running a business is very different from being self-employed. Let's say as a consultant, as a professional, whatever it is that you decide to do in that self-employed space. But to make the shift from being great at the stuff you do, so whether that's law or architecture or web design or whatever skill you've got and what you do and you charge your time for, those skills aren't the skills that make a successful business owner. Even if the business is doing law or architecture or web design, whilst they help you start it up, they actually won't help you keep it going and scaling it. So if you decide that actually you want to get out of this place where you're earning, let's say, I don't know, you got 10 grand a month coming in, and you got a few grand a month expenses, but you really want to build it to a proper business. What you need to do, first of all, you need to get to that stage where the business is absolutely paying your bills week in, week out with no worries. So that means no tax liabilities. That means no credit card debt. It means that the business is actually working for you rather than you working for it. You then need to map out a tactical plan of how you're going to scale up. Now, the practicalities of how you take on other team members, to begin with, you might use other freelancers. And that might seem like madness. Why am I going to charge 50 quid and then give away 45 quid? Well, you're going to do it because it's the very best learning curve to learn how to employ people. It's the very best learning curve to test your market, to see if you can scale beyond the 10, 20, 30 customers that you've got and take it to 100, 200. It's the very best way of scaling up your sales process to see whether the conversion rates that you've had are absolutely accurate. And it's the best way to stress test you as well to see if you're capable of managing and leading a business. So taking on freelancers to begin with, you could then consider looking at funding. Now, the funding market is a whole lot more difficult with coronavirus. Whilst there's been some easy credit for businesses that have been impacted by COVID, going forward, that's going to be tougher. However, there will still be funding options open for good business propositions, because guess what? That's what the banks are around for. So if you've got a business that is truly scalable and you've proven demand, you've proven that you can actually fill up an order book for extra employees to help with or to open a new location, then you can put together a business case, you can get funding, and then it's time to start moving forwards. Now, I know and I appreciate that I've oversimplified that. And I also empathize with the fact that it's been a long time since I've had to, I guess, put my foot down on the pedal and go through those stages. But the biggest thing there and the biggest takeaway that I'd want any listeners to take from that is about understanding the difference between a self-employed role and a business. And if you want it to be a business and you want to employ a team around you and to scale up, you need to really adopt that mindset of being a business and start looking at yourself as a cost of a business. So even if you are a solopreneur, whatever you want to call it, freelancer, consultant, put yourself into your P&L as a cost. Have you actually got a profitable business? If you have, reinvest those funds to scale up rather than using it for a nice Christmas.
Got it.
I feel like Scrooge saying that.
No, I understand. I think a lot of people can learn as well by, I mean, you've given some great tips and advice on what people should do or ought to do. What are the mistakes that most entrepreneurs make? I mean, we all know the stats that most businesses actually do fail,
Yes.
unfortunately. Why do you think that is, and what are the mistakes that
Wow. So that's a multifaceted question, which I'll try and answer as best as possible. But you're absolutely right. Depending on the stats that you believe, after 3 years, 50% of businesses fail. And also within that, I would say that there's a misconception as to the scale that you can truly grow your business, because it's something along the lines of only 4% of businesses ever get to 1 million turnover. And then beyond that, only 4% then sort of scale through that afterwards. But there's a disproportionate balance to the number of people starting a business who think they're going to be the next Facebook, and think they're going to be the next unicorn and really shoot forwards. So what are the most common mistakes? In my book, Boss It, I go through the dream, plan, do, review process. And it's what I've noticed of good businesses, what they do. So they have a compelling dream. However, it's not too abstract and out there, but it's also not too limiting. Because if your dream is to set up a bakery shop in your local town, but that's the entirety of your dream, within 3 years, that bakery shop is going to become the job, and there's going to be nothing entrepreneurial to motivate you. However, if you have a vision that is, let's say, as aggressive as Nike's, which is to dress every athlete in the world, PS, everybody with a body is an athlete, that's too abstract and it's going to seem unachievable. So you need a vision that's compelling, reasonably realistic, but stretches you. You need to plan. And that's not necessarily having a business plan, that's having an operational plan. So not a dusty document with numbers and executive summaries and so on. This is a step-by-step plan. What are you going to do? When are you going to do it by? What depends on it? Who's going to action it? Thirdly, and this is perhaps the biggest failure, is the lack of taking action. I see far too many entrepreneurs rather than entrepreneurs, and they indulge in what I call creative avoidance. So with all respect, subscribing to online courses and summits like this, and designing websites and over-obsessing over them, over-obsessing on funnels, over-obsessing on designing business cards, all of this stuff that acts as a distraction to picking up the phone and speaking to your potential customers. Because you know what? That's the stuff that's uncomfortable. Picking up the phone and the risk of someone saying no to you is far more uncomfortable than spending evening after evening working on your MailChimp campaign and making sure that, oh, should I go for 9 days or 10 days? But the reality is that stuff does not matter. Forget what people say. That stuff doesn't matter. What matters is getting customers in the door and getting pounds in the bank. The final one is a lack of review and monitoring what's gone on and has it worked, has it not worked, and then tweaking accordingly. So that's what I've seen. And then I guess as a side comment, one of the other big weaknesses that I've seen in new entrepreneurs in particular is that they share their business idea with their mum or their friends down the pub, back when we could go down the pub, and they're open, really excited about it. And everyone says, yeah, it's an amazing idea. And they conflate good wishes from people who don't want to upset them with the reality of a product market fit. And unfortunately, the market is the cruelest judge of whether your product or service is going to make it. And I've experienced this myself. I've chucked a substantial 6-figure sum into a tech startup, which didn't go anywhere. And, we got probably 150 paying customers. We got it up to a reasonable standard and it started wiping its face, but it certainly ain't going to pay back the investment. And the reality is the market judged that there wasn't a product market fit, despite what everyone told us, despite the press coverage and so on. So I would say that if I was to give one real takeaway tip from I guess a mindset perspective for new entrepreneurs, don't rely on best wishes because they don't pay the bills.
Do your market research. And don't use your family and friends to do it.
Completely, because who's going to upset your family and friends? Sonia, if you were to tell me about your new venture, I would say to you, Sonia, that's amazing. I'm definitely going to be a customer. But you know what? I'm not a customer until I put a few quid in your bank account.
Completely agree, Carl. Carl, I'd like to just talk a little bit about your new book, Boss It. Tell me, what does Boss It mean? What are the principles behind that?
Yeah, no problem. So I'd love to say that there is some genius behind Boss It, but the title was actually come up by my publishing house. So the joys of being traditionally published rather than self-published is you lose all creative control. However, they did a much better job than me because initially my working title was Be Your Own Boss. And actually Boss It is far snappier and
Trips off the tongue.
it does. So they work wonders for me. Look, I'm not a creative headline writer, so Boss It, it's all about control. It's about controlling your time, your income, and your life. And I talk about business ownership as the method to do that. And within the book, I share both my personal experiences, but also the cumulative experiences of all of the businesses that I've worked with along the way. But it's, for me, I tried to hit the very sweet spot between checklists and cheerleading. Because let's be honest, business books are pretty rubbish. And I'm saying that as a business book author and someone who wrote a pretty awful business book as my first stab.
What makes an awful book and what makes a good book? I guess that's
okay. So what makes an awful book is when it's focused on either checklists or cheerleading. So checklists is your traditional business book. And in fact, my first book was along that way because it was a serious title for Hodder and they had a very rigid structure in which the book needed to be created. And the problem with checklisting books is no one reads them. They sit on the shelf, they get dusty, but no one reads them because they're not very engaging. The narrative isn't in a very compelling format. The other end of the spectrum is cheerleading, which is, oh yeah, you can do it, rah, rah, rah. There's loads of books like that out there, loads of fluff and nonsense, to be honest, but no actionable steps that you can take to really drive forward. So I guess the best way of summarizing it was one of the cover testimonials, which was a guy called Brad Smith. So Brad is the chairman at Nordstrom's, the US shopping chain, and Intuit. So he scaled a business from, I think when he took it on, it's about 15 billion US dollars market cap, and he scaled it to 90 billion. And I'm fortunate enough to count on him as somebody that I can pick up the phone to and meet with. So really, I guess, insightful guy as to how business really works. And he's got 3 million, I believe, small business customers. So he's seen it firsthand, what the challenges are of business books. And his words were that it uniquely addresses the two most important aspects of business ownership, the why and the how. The end result is inspiration and action for the motivated reader. So it's that combination of checklists and cheerleading. So not just providing an entertaining read and, I guess, text popcorn, but also giving the actionable steps that you need to do to make it a success.
Wow, sounds great. And yeah, I think I'll just definitely be picking up my copy. Where do you see the future going? I mean, look, we've talked a little bit about COVID. People are coming out of furlough very soon. How do you see the business landscape progressing in the next few years, or where would you?
Okay. So short term, we're in for a torrid time. Across the board, we're in for a torrid time. We've got furlough ending. It's being propped up, but we've had a very strange situation where our government have supported employees rather than businesses, which is unusual, I guess, for a Conservative government. But that's been with the purpose of massaging employment figures, and that support has to come to an end at some point. We've also got the crystallization of the debt that businesses have built up over the last year. So there is tax deferrals, there's CBILS loans, bounce back loans, there is all sorts of stuff kicking in that in March next year, we're going to have, I believe, a catastrophic crash. And there's no two ways around it. The funding markets are going to dry up the moment that the bank support is pulled away. We can see firsthand, even if we go down to the smallest of businesses who've tried to get bounce back loans, they will know how the banks have been the ones blocking the process, not the government, because of the bank's own governance, and the banks are responsible for 20% of their debt book. So we're going to see a bit of a financial crisis within the business space. We're also going to see, for anyone who employs team members, we're going to see a really interesting position that we've never had before, which is that employees in this really weird environment that we've been in, perversely, employees of some of the bigger companies, have had control for the very first time in their life. Now, that control has been restricted, but they've been able to choose whether they work in their bathroom or in their bedroom or in their kitchen. They've been able to choose if they do the school run. They've been able to choose what times they work. So we're going to have to adapt the way that we work. But longer term, I think it's going to be really good, but we've got a painful few months.
Carl, it's been a really interesting session, and I've just realized we've run out of time. Where did that go? I just want to say thank you so much. It's been such an interesting session. I've learned a lot. And guys, hope you have too. Carl, it's been amazing having you as my fireside guest.
Thank you so much, Sonia.
There you go. Bye.